That night, the phone call from my mom wasn't just another conversation. Her voice was breaking, and she kept asking for someone I couldn't place. The answer was unexpected, and the emotions were real. It felt like time stopped when my mom's tears filled the airwaves. She was asking about someone who meant more than I realized. The question was simple, but the answer was much more complex than I could have imagined. I was prepared for anything, but nothing could prepare me for the raw emotion in my mom's voice. She kept asking for someone who had disappeared long ago. What did this mean for us? And why did it matter now? The fear in my mom's voice was palpable. She kept repeating the same name through her tears. Who was she asking for? And why did it leave me questioning everything I knew? When my mom called, I thought I knew what to expect. But her tears weren't just tears. They were filled with desperation. Who was she asking for, and what had happened to them? I couldn't believe my ears when my mom's voice cracked over the phone. She wasn't just crying, she was asking for someone who had been a part of our lives and then vanished. Who was it? The answer shocked me. Every tear she shed felt like a weight on my chest. My mom was asking for someone whose name I never thought I'd hear again. What did it mean, and why was she asking now? My mom's tears weren't just sadness. They were a plea, a call for someone who had slipped through the cracks of our lives. But who was it? And why did it matter so much? There are moments in life that you never forget, and that phone call was one of them. My mom called me in tears, asking for someone whose name I couldn't place. Why was she so emotional? The moment my mom started crying on the phone, I knew something was wrong. But the name she kept asking about, it was the last thing I expected. Who was it? Let's dive in. You can never prepare for a call like that. My mom's voice was filled with such emotion, asking for someone I didn't think was even part of our lives anymore. Why was she so desperate? Have you ever had a moment when you felt your heart drop? That's how I felt when my mom called, asking for someone who had been out of our lives for so long. Who was it, and what did it mean? My mom's call was unlike any other. Her tears spoke louder than her words, and the name she kept asking for, it made everything else fade into the background. Who was it? Let's find out. When your mom calls crying, your heart stops. But when she asks for someone you never thought she'd mention again, everything changes. Who was it? And why did it matter so much? A phone call, tears, and a name I hadn't heard in years. My mom's emotions were raw, and the person she was asking for, that's where the story takes a twist. I never thought I'd get that phone call. My mom's voice, full of emotion, asking for someone who seemed long gone. Who was it? And why did it make her so upset? The moment my mom cried out for someone I thought was a distant memory, I knew something had shifted. Her tears weren't just sadness. They were filled with longing and confusion. Who was she asking about? My mom's voice cracked, and I couldn't hold back the shock. She kept asking for someone who hadn't been in our lives for so long. What was this about, and why now? There are things you never expect to hear from your mom, and her crying over the phone was one of them. But it wasn't the tears that shocked me. It was the name she kept asking for. The more my mom cried, the more I needed to know. Who was she asking for, and why did it matter so much? Let's unravel this mystery together. A single phone call can change everything. My mom's tears and her questions about someone I hadn't thought about in ages did exactly that. Who was it? I was caught off guard by the pain in my mom's voice. She was asking for someone, and the more she cried, the more I realized just how deep this story went. What would you do if your mom called you in tears, asking about someone you never expected her to ask about? That's exactly what happened, and the mystery will leave you speechless. I thought I knew everything about my mom, but that phone call, it shattered everything. She was asking for someone who had been gone for years. Who was it, and why did it matter? Imagine the confusion and pain when your mom calls, her voice trembling, asking for someone who seemed like a distant memory. You won't believe who she was asking for. Sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest truths. My mom's phone call, in tears, was one of those moments, and the person she kept asking about changed everything. It wasn't just another phone call. My mom's voice was filled with so much emotion as she asked for someone I never thought she'd mention again. Who was it? Let's find out. Have you ever felt the weight of a phone call that shook you to your core? Well, when my mom called me in tears, it wasn't just any call. It was a cry for help that still haunts me to this day. You won't believe who she kept asking about. It started as a normal evening, but when the phone rang, everything changed. My mom's voice trembled with raw emotion, and through her tears, she begged me to understand. Do you know who she kept asking about? I couldn't have imagined it. The words that came out of my mom's mouth were so unexpected. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Her tears were real, and so was the fear in her voice. What she asked about, it changed everything. There are moments in life when you feel like the world just stops. My mom called me sobbing, asking for someone, Someone who had been on my mind, too. But why? What was it that had her so distraught? Wait for it. Imagine your mom calling you in the middle of the night, tears streaming down the phone. You know something's wrong, but you can't guess what. And then she says, "Where is he? Who could she possibly be talking about?" I'll never forget the sound of my mom's voice on that call. Her tears were suffocating, and all I could hear was one question over and over again. Who was she asking for? Could it have been a sign? You have to know. What do you do when the person who raised you calls you in tears, begging you to find someone? That's exactly what happened. And the answer to who she kept asking for will leave you speechless. My mom's heart-wrenching call brought me back to a place I thought I'd left behind. As the tears fell on both ends of the line, one name kept echoing in her words. But what did it mean? Let's dive into the mystery. The phone call was simple, but the emotions it stirred in me were anything but. My mom was crying, asking for someone who I thought was lost forever. Who was it? Why was she so desperate to know? Have you ever felt like the walls were closing in? That's exactly how I felt when I heard my mom's voice crack with emotion on the other end of the line. She was asking about someone from the past, and it hit me harder than I expected. As the phone rang, I never imagined the words that would follow. My mom's voice, shaky and fragile, asking for someone I hadn't seen in years. What did it mean? What was she trying to tell me? Tears, unanswered questions, and the sound of my mom's voice still haunt me. When she called asking for someone I never thought would come up again, I knew something deep was at play. You won't believe who it was. Every phone call can be a surprise, but none like this. My mom's voice trembled with emotion as she asked for someone whose name I hadn't heard in ages. What was going through her mind? I had to find out. Imagine a phone call that changes everything. My mom's tears were not just tears. They were filled with longing, filled with a question about someone who had slipped through the cracks of time. Who was she asking about? The words I heard when my mom called in tears still echo in my mind. Where is he? She asked over and over. What was it about this person that left her so broken-hearted? You'll never guess. When my mom called, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't expect this. Her voice broke as she asked for someone, and I could feel the depth of her grief. Who could it have been? Let's find out. A call that should have been routine turned into a lifetime moment. My mom's tears were impossible to ignore, but the person she was asking for made no sense at first. Who was it? The mystery continues. The tears were real, but the person she was asking about, well, that was the real shocker. My mom called me out of nowhere, crying, desperate for something I didn't know existed. Can you guess who? You can never prepare for a call like that. My mom's tears were more than just sadness. They were a plea, a desperate cry for someone I thought was lost forever. The name she mentioned, it stopped me cold. When my mom's sobs echoed through the phone, I was frozen. She wasn't just crying. She was asking for someone who had disappeared from our lives years ago. Who was it? And why now? Have you ever heard your mom cry and felt like your whole world might fall apart? That's how I felt when she called, asking for someone I didn't think she'd ever bring up again. You won't believe who it was. The call came out of nowhere, my mom's voice, shaking, asking about someone who seemed to have disappeared from her life. I never thought I'd hear that name again. Who was it? And why did it matter so much? A phone call, a mother's tears, and a name I hadn't heard in years. That's how it started. But what came after that changed everything. Who was she asking about, and what did it mean?